You are waiting for something, aren't you? Perhaps you've been praying for months, maybe years. You've whispered your deepest longing into the silence, again and again. And sometimes it feels like the universe has simply forgotten about you. But what if I told you that right now, in this very moment, God is not silent at all? What if the answer you've been desperately seeking has already been set into motion, and you've been missing the signs because nobody taught you how to recognize them? My beloved friend, I am going to share with you 3 unmistakable signs that God is answering your prayer right now. Not tomorrow, not someday, right now. And these signs are so subtle, so contrary to what you've been taught to expect, that most people walk right past them, never knowing they were standing in the middle of their own miracle. I learned these truths not from books alone, but from years of deep meditation, from communion with the divine, and from watching thousands of souls finally recognize what had been in front of them all along. What I'm about to share with you will change not just how you pray, but how you see reality itself. Because the problem has never been that God doesn't answer. The problem is that we've been looking for fireworks when God speaks in whispers. We've been expecting mountains to move when sometimes God answers by first moving something inside of you so small, you almost missed it. So I ask you now, with everything in your heart, to stay with me. Not just for the next few minutes. Because by the time we finish this conversation, you will never pray the same way again. You will never wait the same way again. And you might just realize that the answer you've been begging for has been unfolding all around you while you were too busy looking for something else. This isn't a teaching about blind faith. This is about recognition. This is about waking up to a conversation that's already happening. Are you ready? Then let us begin. Before I reveal these 3 signs to you, I need you to understand something fundamental about how the divine actually works. Because this is where almost everyone gets lost. You see, we've been conditioned to think of prayer like sending a letter to a distant king. We write our request, we send it off into the cosmic void, and then we sit by the mailbox waiting for a package to arrive with a clear label that says, "From God to you, contents." One miracle, but that's not how this works. That has never been how this works. God is not distant. God is not separate from you, sitting on some faraway throne deciding whether you've been good enough to deserve an answer. The divine is the very consciousness that animates your being right now. The intelligence that beats your heart without you thinking about it. The force that heals your wounds while you sleep. The awareness that exists before your first thought in the morning. You are not separate from this intelligence. You are an expression of it. So when you pray, you're not sending a message outward. You're actually aligning your consciousness with the infinite consciousness that already knows what you need. You're tuning your radio to a frequency that's always broadcasting. And here's what's absolutely crucial for you to understand. The moment you pray with genuine feeling, with real surrender, with true devotion, something shifts in the invisible realm immediately. Not later, immediately. But the manifestation in physical reality? That follows a divine timing that's orchestrated with such precision, such intelligence, that your limited human mind couldn't plan it better even if you tried. The answer comes through a series of subtle changes, inner shifts, unexpected encounters, and strange coincidences that are actually not coincidences at all. They're synchronicities. They're the breadcrumbs of God. I remember when I first truly understood this. I was a young man, and I had been praying intensely for spiritual illumination. I wanted God realization so desperately it consumed me. Every day I would meditate for hours. Every night I would pray until tears streamed down my face. And nothing seemed to happen. No lightning bolt, no vision, no voice from heaven, just silence. I felt abandoned. I felt like perhaps I wasn't worthy. Perhaps God answered everyone else's prayers but not mine. Have you ever felt this way? That terrible loneliness when you're pouring your heart out and receiving only silence in return? But then something small happened. So small I almost dismissed it. I was walking through a marketplace, lost in my disappointment, when an old book fell from a vendor's table right at my feet. Not near my feet. Directly at my feet, as if placed there by an invisible hand. I picked it up, opened it randomly, and my eyes fell upon this verse. To those who are constantly devoted, and who worship me with love, I give the understanding by which they can come to me. In that moment, something broke open inside me. Not because the words were new. I had read the Gita before. but because suddenly I realized that this moment, this book falling at this exact second when I needed it most, was not an accident. This was God answering. Not with fireworks, not with a booming voice, but with perfect timing, with a gentle nudge, with a whisper that said, "I am here. I have always been here, and I am guiding you even when you cannot see it." That moment taught me to recognize the first sign, and it's the sign that most people miss completely because they're looking for something dramatic. The first sign that God is answering your prayer right now is this. You begin to experience unexpected peace about the very thing that was tormenting you. Listen carefully to what I'm saying. I'm not talking about the peace that comes after you get what you wanted. I'm talking about a peace that makes absolutely no logical sense. Your circumstances haven't changed yet. The problem is still there. The need is still unmet. But somehow, mysteriously, the desperate clawing anxiety has softened. There's a subtle knowing, a quiet certainty deep in your chest that whispers, everything is going to be okay. This peace is not something you create through positive thinking or affirmations. You cannot manufacture it. It descends upon you like grace. And when it does, it's one of the most unmistakable signatures of the divine at work in your life. Why does this happen? Because before God changes your external circumstances, God often first changes your internal state. The divine prepares you to receive what you've asked for by first bringing you into alignment with it. That alignment feels like peace. It feels like surrender. It feels like you've somehow already arrived at the destination even though you're still on the journey. I've seen this happen countless times. A woman prays desperately for financial provision. For weeks she's consumed with worry. Can't sleep. Can't eat. Then one morning she wakes up and something has shifted. She's still broke. The bills are still due. But she feels, inexplicably, that she's going to be okay. She can't explain it to anyone because it doesn't make rational sense, but she feels it. 3 days later, an unexpected opportunity appears. A job offer. A gift from a stranger. A refund she'd forgotten about. The external answer came after the internal peace. A man prays for healing from a devastating diagnosis. The medical tests still show the same results. But one day during meditation, he's overwhelmed with this profound sense that he's already whole. That his true nature is beyond this body, beyond this disease. That peace doesn't make the illness disappear overnight, but it shifts something fundamental in him. His stress hormones decrease. His body's healing mechanisms activate more powerfully. His decisions become clearer. And gradually, against all odds, his health begins to transform. Do you see what's happening here? The peace is not just a nice feeling. It's actually the first wave of the answer itself. It's evidence that your prayer has been heard and that the machinery of the universe is already reorganizing itself on your behalf. But here's what you must understand. If you dismiss this peace, if you ignore it and go right back into anxiety and desperation, you're actually pushing against the very answer that's trying to come to you. That peace is a gift. It's a sign. Honor it, trust it, let it grow. When you feel that unexpected peace about your situation, don't question it. Don't let your logical mind talk you out of it by saying, "But nothing has changed yet, so I shouldn't feel peaceful." That's exactly the point. Nothing has changed in the visible world yet, which means this peace is coming from the invisible realm where all changes originate. It's coming from the place where your answer already exists in potential, waiting to materialize. Now, let me share with you the second sign. And this one is equally subtle but profoundly powerful when you learn to recognize it. The second sign that God is answering your prayer right now is this. Your attention begins to shift naturally toward new possibilities and away from old patterns. What do I mean by this? Let me explain. When you're stuck in a problem, your attention becomes fixated on the problem. You think about it constantly, you rehearse it in your mind. You tell the story of your difficulty to anyone who will listen. Your mental energy is trapped in a loop, going over and over the same territory, seeing the same limited options, feeling the same frustration. This is natural, this is human, but it's also what keeps you trapped. When God begins to answer your prayer, one of the first things that happens is that your attention starts to move. Suddenly, almost without trying, you find yourself thinking about things differently. You notice opportunities you didn't see before. You feel drawn to people or places or ideas that weren't on your radar yesterday. You lose interest in complaints and drama that used to consume your energy. You find yourself spontaneously imagining new possibilities. This shift in attention is not something you force. It happens organically, almost mysteriously. And it's happening because the divine is literally rewiring your consciousness, opening your eyes to the path forward that was always there, but you couldn't see it because your attention was locked in the old pattern. I'll give you a concrete example from my own experience. There was a period when I was trying to establish an ashram, a spiritual community where people could come to learn meditation and grow closer to God. I had prayed intensely for this, but every door seemed to close. Every piece of land I found was either too expensive, or the owners wouldn't sell, or the location wasn't right. I was becoming discouraged. Then one day, I was walking through a garden, and instead of my mind spinning with worry about the ashram problem, I found myself completely absorbed in watching a hummingbird. I mean truly absorbed. I watched how it moved from flower to flower with such intelligence, such efficiency. How it knew exactly where to go. How it didn't force anything, just followed its inner guidance from one source of nectar to the next. And in that moment of complete presence with this tiny bird, a thought came to me so clearly it was like someone spoke it into my mind. What if you stopped trying to find the perfect location and instead focused on creating the perfect community, wherever you are right now? That one shift in perspective changed everything. Within weeks, people started gathering in a small space we already had access to. The community grew organically, and eventually, the perfect location appeared without me straining and searching for it. But it could only appear after my attention had shifted from desperate grasping to patient cultivation. Do you see what happened there? God answered my prayer not by giving me what I thought I needed, but by redirecting my attention to what was actually important. And that redirection felt effortless, natural, like something that happened to me, rather than something I did. This is what I want you to watch for in your own life. When you notice your thoughts naturally moving in new directions, when you find yourself interested in things that might be part of your solution, when old grievances and worries seem to matter less without you trying to let them go, this is not random. This is divine intervention at the level of consciousness. Your attention is the most powerful tool you have. Where your attention goes, energy flows. What you focus on expands. God knows this. So, when the divine wants to answer your prayer, one of the primary ways this happens is by gently, gradually, lovingly shifting what you pay attention to. New information comes across your path. A conversation with a friend suddenly sparks an idea. You feel inexplicably drawn to learn a new skill or visit a new place. These are not distractions from your prayer being answered. These are the answer unfolding. But most people miss this sign because they're so attached to their specific idea of how the answer should come that they dismiss anything that looks different. They're waiting for door number 3 to open, so they ignore doors number 7 and 11 that God is actually opening for them. Let me tell you about Sarah. Sarah isn't her real name, but her story is real. She came to me in deep distress because she had been praying for her marriage to heal. Her husband had become distant, cold, barely spoke to her. She was convinced that the answer to her prayer would look like him suddenly becoming warm and attentive again, like the early days of their relationship. She prayed and prayed for this specific outcome, but nothing changed with him. In fact, he seemed to drift further away. She was heartbroken and convinced God wasn't listening. Then something interesting started happening. She found herself drawn to a small community garden near her apartment building. Every morning, she'd wake up early. Not to pray, she'd given up on that, but just to sit among the plants. She didn't realize it at first, but something was shifting inside her. One morning, an elderly woman who tended the tomatoes struck up a conversation. They talked about nothing important: the weather, the squirrels stealing seeds, how cilantro never seems to grow quite right. But Sarah felt lighter after those conversations. Then she started helping with the watering. Then she began bringing coffee for the other gardeners. What Sarah didn't recognize was that her heart was actually opening wider than it had been in years. See, when we're in crisis, we often clench. We grip tightly to our pain, our story, our specific vision of how salvation should arrive. But in that garden, without even trying, Sarah had loosened her grip. She was connecting with life again, with soil and sunlight and simple human kindness. She was, without knowing it, creating space for something new to enter. 6 months later, through a connection made in that very garden, Sarah found a new position that paid even better than her previous job. But here's what moved me most when she shared this story. She said the job wasn't the miracle. The miracle was rediscovering her capacity to feel joy in the middle of uncertainty. The miracle was learning that her worthiness wasn't tied to her productivity. The miracle was the morning she realized she'd been talking to God all along, through her hands in the soil, through her laughter with strangers, through her commitment to showing up, even when she didn't feel hopeful. This is what prayer without grasping looks like. It's organic. It unfolds. It doesn't follow our timeline or our script. Sarah's prayers weren't being ignored. They were being answered in a language she'd temporarily forgotten how to speak. And this brings us to perhaps the most challenging realization. Sometimes the answer to our prayer is the transformation of the person doing the praying. Sometimes God isn't moving the mountain, God is giving you the strength, patience, and perspective to either climb it or discover the path around it. Sometimes the miracle isn't external change but internal metamorphosis. I've seen this transformation countless times. Someone prays desperately for a difficult relationship to change, a critical parent, a distant spouse, a toxic friend. They pray for months, maybe years, begging for the other person to soften, to understand, to become different, and nothing shifts. The prayers seem to bounce off the ceiling, unanswered. But then, slowly, something else begins to happen. The person praying starts to change. They develop boundaries they never had before. They find compassion for wounds they couldn't previously see. They discover strength they didn't know existed within them. They stop needing the other person's approval to feel whole. And suddenly, the relationship does change, not because the other person transformed, but because they did. The prayer was answered, just not in the way they expected. This is the alchemy that happens in the space between asking and receiving. We enter prayer as one version of ourselves, and, if we're paying attention, we emerge as someone new. The waiting isn't wasted time, it's the crucible where transformation happens. Every day we continue to show up, to hope, to believe despite the silence. We're being refined. We're becoming people capable of holding the answer when it finally arrives. Think about the prayers you've carried for years. What have they taught you about endurance? About faith? About your own capacity to keep loving, keep hoping, keep believing when there's no evidence it makes a difference? These aren't minor lessons. These are the foundations of character. These are the qualities that make life meaningful. There's a question I ask myself when prayers seem unanswered. What if the delay is protection? What if I'm being spared from receiving something I'm not ready for, something that would ultimately harm rather than help? I think about prayers I'm grateful weren't answered, the relationship I begged to save that would have diminished me, the opportunity I desperately wanted that would have taken me away from my true path, the outcome I was certain I needed that would have prevented something better from arriving. We pray from where we are, with the understanding we currently have. But God sees further. God sees the ripple effects we can't perceive, the intersections we can't imagine, the growth we still need. And here's the beautiful paradox. Sometimes the unanswered prayer is the answer. Sometimes not yet is the most loving response God could give. I think about the people who prayed desperately to stay in relationships that were slowly destroying them. Years later, standing in healthier love, they whisper thank you for that closed door. I think about the jobs not gotten, the moves that fell through, the opportunities that slipped away only to realize later that what seemed like rejection was actually protection. There's a woman I know who prayed for years to have a child. She endured treatment after treatment, disappointment after disappointment. Each negative test felt like God was silent, absent, uncaring. In her deepest grief, she began volunteering at a children's home, just to be around kids, to channel her maternal longing somewhere. There she met a little girl who'd been overlooked for adoption because of a minor disability. Their eyes met, and she knew. Today, she tells me she can't imagine life without this specific child, this soul who was always meant to be her daughter. Had her earlier prayers been answered, she would have missed this meeting. This isn't about toxic positivity pretending every tragedy has a silver lining or that pain isn't real. The grief of unanswered prayer is legitimate and should be honored, but it's also true that our perspective is limited. We see one chapter. God sees the entire story. You pray for smooth seas. But maybe God is developing your navigation skills for a journey you don't yet know you'll take. You pray for immediate relief, but maybe the struggle is building resilience you'll desperately need later. You pray for clarity, but maybe the uncertainty is teaching you to trust in darkness what you learned in light. The prayer isn't always about getting what you want. Sometimes it's about becoming who you need to be, and the person you need to be isn't always shaped in comfort, it's forged in the fire of unanswered requests. I've watched people pray for years to find their purpose, to discover their calling, to know exactly what they're meant to do with their life. And nothing happens. No burning bush, no divine revelation, no cosmic memo arrives in their inbox, and they feel abandoned, confused, lost in a maze without a map. But then I look back at their life 5 years later, and I see something remarkable. I see that every job they thought was a detour was actually training. Every relationship that fell apart was actually clearing space. Every failure they experienced was actually eliminating what wouldn't work so they could discover what would. The purpose they desperately prayed to see clearly was being quietly constructed in the background of their seemingly chaotic life. God was answering, just not with words, with experiences, with tests, with redirections that felt like rejections but were actually course corrections. The prayer wasn't denied. It was being answered in a language they hadn't learned to speak yet, the language of divine timing, where understanding comes after experience, not before it. Think about it this way. When a child asks their parent, "Why can't I touch the stove?" the parent doesn't launch into a detailed explanation of thermal conductivity and third-degree burns. They say, "Because I said so." Not because they don't have a reason, but because the child doesn't yet have the framework to understand the reason. The protection comes before the explanation. That's what unanswered prayers often are, protection before explanation. You're being told no or not yet or something different because you don't yet have the framework to understand why the thing you're asking for isn't actually the thing you need. You're asking for the stove, not realizing you're about to get burned. And God, in infinite patience, is saying, "I know you don't understand this now, but trust me." And here's where it gets uncomfortable. Sometimes the no isn't about protecting you from something harmful. Sometimes it's about preparing you for something bigger. Sometimes God denies your current prayer because answering it would actually limit what He's trying to build in you. Think about it like this. You pray for a promotion at your current job. You pray hard. You're qualified. You've worked overtime. You deserve it. And someone else gets it. Someone less experienced. Someone who frankly didn't work as hard as you did. That stings. That feels like betrayal. That feels like God wasn't listening or doesn't care. But 6 months later, you get recruited by a completely different company. Better position, better pay, better culture. And you realize if you'd gotten that promotion, you would have stayed. You would have been comfortable. You would have stopped looking. That no wasn't rejection, it was redirection. Or you pray for a relationship to work out. You're convinced this person is the one. You've invested time, energy, emotion. You've pictured the future, and it falls apart. And you're devastated. You feel abandoned by God. You wonder why He would let you go through this pain if He's supposed to be loving. But a year later, you meet someone who actually sees you. Someone who doesn't require you to shrink yourself to fit into their life. Someone who brings out the best version of who you are. And you look back at that previous relationship and think, thank God that didn't work out. That no was protection. It was preparation. It was God honoring the future version of you that you hadn't met yet. This is the hard truth. You don't always know what you need. You know what you want. You know what feels good right now, but you don't have the vantage point to see how this moment connects to the next chapter, or the chapter after that, or the life you're supposed to be living 5 years from now. And God does. He sees the whole story while you're still reading page 1. So when life doesn't make sense, when the doors slam shut and the silence feels cruel, maybe it's not punishment. Maybe it's protection. Maybe it's preparation. Maybe God is saying, not yet. Not this. I have something better. Something truer. Something more aligned with who you're becoming. I've learned that closed doors are some of God's greatest gifts. Because they force you to turn around. They force you to look in a direction you never would have considered. They push you toward paths you didn't even know existed. Think about the job you didn't get that devastated you at the time. Now look at where you are. Would you have met the people you've met? Would you have learned what you've learned? Would you have become who you are if that door had opened? Or the relationship that ended and felt like the end of everything? But it wasn't the end. It was the beginning of you learning to stand on your own. It was the beginning of you discovering your worth doesn't come from being chosen by someone else. It was the beginning of a journey toward a love that actually sees you, values you, honors you. We spend so much time mourning closed doors that we miss the open windows. We're so focused on what we lost that we can't see what we're being offered. We're so attached to our plan that we reject God's plan, even when His plan is objectively better. And here's what I want you to understand. God's rejections are redirections. Every no is pointing you toward a bigger yes. Every closed door is clearing the path to the right door. Every delay is actually divine timing protecting you from something that would have derailed you. The universe isn't against you. God isn't withholding from you. Life isn't punishing you. You're being prepared, even when it feels like you're being passed over. You're being positioned for something greater, even when it feels like you're being pushed backward. Your only job is to trust the process, to surrender the timeline, to release your grip on how you think it should happen, and open your hands to receive how it's actually going to happen. And let me tell you something that nobody talks about. The universe has a sense of humor about your plans. You know what I mean. You create this perfect strategy, this 5-year plan, this detailed roadmap of exactly how your success will unfold. And the universe looks at it, smiles gently and says, "That's adorable. Now let me show you what's actually going to happen." And what actually happens is always better. Always more aligned. Always more you than anything you could have planned from your limited perspective. I've watched this play out hundreds of times. The person who was supposed to launch their business in January but kept hitting delays, only to discover in March that the market had completely shifted and their timing was now perfect. The artist who couldn't get gallery representation for years, then randomly met someone at a coffee shop who connected them with their dream opportunity. The writer who got rejected by every traditional publisher, then self-published and built an audience 10 times larger than any publisher could have given them. The delays weren't failures, they were divine timing orchestrating circumstances you couldn't see yet. But here's what makes this so hard for us. We're conditioned to believe that struggle means we're doing something wrong, that if it's not flowing easily, we should quit. That resistance is a sign we're on the wrong path. Sometimes, yes. Sometimes resistance is your intuition telling you this isn't aligned. But sometimes resistance is just the natural friction of growth. Sometimes the challenge isn't a stop sign, it's a strengthening process. Sometimes you're not being blocked, you're being prepared. And the difference between those two? You feel it in your body. Wrong path resistance feels heavy, draining, like swimming against a current that's pulling you further from shore. Growth resistance feels difficult but energizing, like lifting weights that are making you stronger. One depletes you, the other builds you. So when you're in that space of uncertainty, waiting for your breakthrough, ask yourself, does this challenge feel like it's killing my spirit, or is it forging my character? Am I being warned away, or am I being refined? Your body knows. Your intuition knows. You just have to get quiet enough to listen. That's why meditation isn't optional in this process. It's essential, not as some spiritual luxury, but as the fundamental technology for rewiring your relationship with yourself. You don't need hours of it. Even 5 minutes of genuine stillness can shift everything. 5 minutes where you're not consuming, not producing, not managing anyone's emotions but your own. Sit, breathe, notice what comes up. And this is crucial. Don't try to fix it, analyze it, or make it mean something profound. Just observe. Watch your thoughts like clouds passing through the sky. Watch your emotions like weather systems moving through. This practice trains you to create space between stimulus and response, between what someone says and how you react, between what you feel and what you do about it. That space is your freedom. That's where your power lives. And in that space, you start to notice something fascinating. The thoughts that have been running your life aren't even yours. They're inherited, downloaded, absorbed from parents, teachers, partners, culture, Media, I'm too much. Where did that come from? Who told you that first? I need to be nicer. According to whom? What does nicer even mean? I should be over this by now. Says who? What timeline are you measuring yourself against? When you start questioning these thoughts instead of obeying them, everything changes. You realize you've been living according to someone else's instruction manual, following rules you never agreed to, pursuing goals that were never actually yours. And here's what nobody tells you about awakening: it's not this gentle, blissful unfolding. Sometimes it's devastating. Sometimes it means looking at your entire life and realizing you've been performing a role, playing a character, living someone else's dream. That moment of recognition can feel like death. Because in a way, it is. The false self is dying. The persona you constructed to be lovable, to be acceptable, to be safe, it's crumbling. And you have to let it. You have to grieve it. You have to feel the full weight of all those years spent betraying yourself for belonging. But on the other side of that grief, liberation, lightness, the extraordinary relief of finally being yourself. And in that lightness, something remarkable happens. The energy you once spent maintaining the facade, the constant vigilance, the mental gymnastics, the emotional suppression, all of that suddenly becomes available for living, really living. You discover reserves of creativity you forgot you had. That novel you always wanted to write, those dance classes, that business idea, they're suddenly not someday dreams anymore. Because you're not exhausted from being someone else. One of my coaching clients described it perfectly. She said, I used to come home from work and collapse. I thought I was just tired from working. But after I started being more honest about my opinions and boundaries at the office, I came home with energy. I started painting again. I realized I wasn't tired from working. I was tired from pretending. This is what authenticity gives back to you. Your life force. The energy that was locked up in performance becomes available for purpose. And here's something nobody warns you about: when you stop performing, you start attracting differently. Not necessarily more people, sometimes fewer, but the right ones. The kinds of connections that don't require you to be on all the time. Relationships where silence is comfortable, where you can have a bad day without apologizing for your existence, where your weird interests aren't something to hide but something to share. I remember the first time I walked into a room full of people and felt no impulse to scan for approval. No mental calculations about how to position myself, what to emphasize, what to downplay. Just presence. It felt almost boring at first, which tells you how addicted we become to the drama of impression management. But beneath that initial flatness was something profound. Peace. The peace of not being at war with yourself. Of not having to remember which version of you this person knows. Of not triple-checking your words before you speak. This peace, this is what people are actually searching for when they chase achievement, validation, success. They think the resume will bring peace. The relationship status will bring peace. The net worth will bring peace. But peace was always available. Right here. In the radical act of being exactly who you are. And here's what nobody tells you about that radical act. It doesn't look radical from the outside. It doesn't come with fanfare or applause. Most of the time, it looks like nothing at all. It looks like sitting in your car for 5 extra minutes before going inside because you need to finish crying first. It looks like ordering the same coffee every single day because you like what you like and you're done pretending otherwise. It looks like saying, I need to go home now, at a party where everyone else is still having fun. The most revolutionary thing you'll ever do is respect your own limits. I used to think boundaries made me rigid, difficult, high maintenance. I watched other people say yes to everything, accommodate everyone, bend themselves into impossible shapes, and I thought that's what flexibility looked like. That's what being easygoing meant. Then I watched those same people collapse, break down, wake up one day not recognizing themselves in the mirror because they'd spent so long being what everyone else needed that they'd completely forgotten what they actually were. Boundaries aren't walls, they're definitions. They're the edges that make you a specific person instead of an amorphous blob of people-pleasing. They're what allow you to show up fully because you're not constantly managing resentment or exhaustion. And yes, some people will call you difficult. Let them. Difficult for whom? For people who benefited from your lack of boundaries? For systems that required your self-abandonment to function? Good. Be difficult for them. Because here's the truth. The right people don't find your boundaries difficult. They find them refreshing, clear, honest. The right people aren't looking for a martyr or a doormat. They're looking for a person. And you can't be a person without edges. Your edges are where you begin. I learned this the hard way. I learned it by saying yes when I meant no, by showing up when I needed rest, by laughing at jokes that hurt me, by pretending I was fine when I was fracturing. I learned it by becoming so accommodating that I accommodated myself right out of my own life. And the wild thing is, nobody asked me to do this. Nobody demanded that I erase myself. I did it voluntarily. I did it because I believed that my worthiness was contingent on my usefulness. I believed that love was something you earned through service, through sacrifice, through slowly dismantling yourself until you fit perfectly into the spaces other people needed filled. But here's what nobody tells you about that strategy. It works. Until it doesn't. For a while, people do appreciate you. They do rely on you. They do call you kind and selfless and good. And that feels like evidence. That feels like proof that you're doing the right thing. But what you don't realize is that you're training people to expect your self-abandonment. You're teaching them that your needs are negotiable. You're building relationships on the foundation of your own disappearance. And one day you wake up and realize that nobody actually knows you. They know the accommodating version. They know the easy version. They know the version that smiles and nods and never causes problems. But they don't know the person underneath all that performance. They don't know your boundaries because you've never shown them. They don't know your limits because you've never admitted you had any. And when you finally try to assert yourself, when you finally say, actually, that doesn't work for me, or I need something different, people are shocked. They're confused. Some of them are even angry. Not because you're being unreasonable, but because you're being unfamiliar. You're disrupting the pattern. You're changing the rules of a game they didn't even know they were playing. This is the loneliest part. Realizing that you've been so busy being what everyone needed that you never gave anyone the chance to know what you needed. You never gave anyone the opportunity to show up for the real you, because you never revealed the real you. And the question that haunts you is, would they have loved me anyway? If I had been honest from the beginning, if I had taken up space, if I had asked for what I needed, would they have stayed? You'll never know. And that's the grief you have to carry. But here's what I've learned to do with that grief. I've learned to let it teach me, instead of destroy me. Because the truth is, you can't go back and redo those relationships. You can't rewind time and show up differently. But you can honor what you lost by doing better now. You can take the lesson and apply it forward. I started small. I started saying no when I meant no. Not with aggression, not with apologies stacked on top of apologies, but with clarity. No, I can't do that. Period. And you know what happened? The world didn't end. Some people got uncomfortable, sure. Some people pushed back. But the ones who mattered, the ones who actually cared about me and not just what I could do for them, they respected it. They stayed. I started asking for what I needed, not hints, not hoping someone would read my mind. Actual words. I need support right now. I need space to think. I need you to listen without trying to fix it. And it felt awkward at first, clunky, like I was speaking a language I'd never been taught. But the more I did it, the more natural it became. And the more I did it, the more I realized how much energy I'd been wasting trying to be psychic, trying to anticipate everyone else's needs while completely ignoring my own. I started taking up space. I stopped making myself smaller in rooms, in conversations, in my own life. I stopped apologizing for existing. I stopped prefacing every opinion with, I might be wrong but, or, this is probably stupid but, I just said what I thought. I just showed up as I was. And yes, some people didn't like it. Some people preferred the version of me that bent and folded and disappeared. But those people were never really for me anyway. And here's the thing nobody tells you about boundaries. They're not walls. They're not about shutting people out. They're about letting the right people in. When you're clear about who you are and what you need, you stop attracting people who want to use you. You start attracting people who want to know you. Real relationships, the kind that actually last, they're built on truth. not performance. Not self-sacrifice, truth. Because when you're living in truth, the universe has no choice but to reflect that truth back to you. I watched this happen with a musician I met in Nashville. Talented guy, incredible voice. For years, he chased the industry standard, wrote songs that sounded like everything else on the radio, played the political games, tried to fit the mold, and he got close. So close. Record deals that almost happened. Tours that fell through at the last minute. Always times almost asterisk, never times their asterisk. Then one day, he stopped. He told me, I realized I was trying to be successful at something I didn't even want. I was chasing someone else's dream. So, he started writing the music that actually moved him. Weird, honest, raw stuff that didn't fit any format. He stopped networking and started creating. He stopped performing and started expressing. Within 6 months, everything shifted. Not because the industry suddenly understood him, but because he finally understood himself. The right people found him. The right opportunities appeared. Not the ones he'd been chasing. Better ones. This is what I mean by truth. Truth doesn't guarantee you'll get what you thought you wanted. It guarantees you'll get what you actually need. And here's where it gets really interesting. Truth has a resonance that lies don't have. When you speak your truth, when you live your truth, people feel it. Not consciously maybe, but somewhere deep, in that place beyond words, they recognize it. They're drawn to it. Because truth is so rare that when it appears, it's like oxygen in a room that's been sealed too long. Everyone talks about authenticity these days. It's become a buzzword, a marketing strategy. Be authentic, they say, right before teaching you the formula for authentic-looking content. But real authenticity isn't a strategy. It's a surrender. It's saying, this is who I am. This is what I believe. This is what matters to me. And if that's not enough, then it's not meant to be. That last part, if that's not enough, that's where most people stumble. Because we're so afraid of not being enough that we add layers, we perform, we enhance, we spin, we think we need to be more. But what if you're already enough? What if the truth of who you are, right now, is exactly what's needed? You don't have to earn your place here. You don't need more accomplishments to justify taking up space. You don't need to become someone else to deserve love, rest, or peace. The tree doesn't apologize for being a tree. The river doesn't question whether it's river enough. And you don't have to prove your worth by grinding yourself into dust. I know how seductive it is, the belief that just one more achievement, one more milestone, one more external validation will finally make you feel complete. But here's what I've learned. That finish line keeps moving, because the problem was never that you weren't enough. The problem was that you believed you weren't. And that belief? It didn't come from you. It came from a world that profits from your insecurity. From systems designed to keep you chasing, consuming, comparing. From a culture that measures human value by productivity and equates rest with laziness. But you are not a machine built for output. You are a living, breathing miracle. You are stardust arranged in a shape that can think, feel, love, and wonder. Your value isn't conditional. It doesn't fluctuate with your bank account or your follower count. It just is. I'm not saying ambition is wrong. I'm not saying we shouldn't strive or grow or reach for our dreams. What I'm saying is you can do all of that from a place of wholeness, not from a wound. You can create from joy, not just fear. You can work toward goals because they excite you, not because you're trying to outrun shame. And when you do this, when you build from a foundation of self-worth instead of self-doubt, everything changes. You stop sabotaging yourself. You stop needing permission. You stop waiting for the world to validate what you already know deep down. That you matter. That you belong. That you are already, in this moment, worthy of the life you're dreaming of. Not someday. Not after you fix yourself. Now. So take a breath. Feel your feet on the ground. Notice the miracle of your own heartbeat. And ask yourself, what would I do today if I already believed I was enough? That's your answer. That's your way forward. Not from lack. From fullness. Because once you understand this, once you really feel it, you start to see through every trick the mind plays. You see the pattern. You see the loop. Someone cuts you off in traffic, and instead of rage, you feel curiosity. Oh, there's defensiveness arising. There's the story that I've been disrespected, and just naming it, just seeing it takes 90% of its power away. Your boss criticizes your work, and instead of collapse, you notice there's fear. There's the belief that my worth is tied to performance. And suddenly you're not times the reaction. You're with it, compassionately. Like a parent holding a scared child. This is what they don't teach you. This is what gets left out of every success seminar, every motivational video, every 5-step plan to confidence. The real shift isn't about getting stronger. It's about becoming more aware, asterisk. It's about catching yourself mid-story and asking, wait, is this even true? And here's the twist, the beautiful, liberating twist. Most of the time, it's not. Most of the time, you're arguing with a ghost. You're defending against a threat that only exists in memory or imagination. You're trying to prove something to someone who stopped caring years ago, or who never cared in the first place. And when you really see it, the whole thing just dissolves. Not because you fought it, not because you overcame it. You stopped agreeing with the prosecution. Now, I won't lie to you. This doesn't mean the thoughts stop coming. It doesn't mean you'll never feel insecure again. What it means is you'll stop being owned by it. You'll stop organizing your entire life around avoiding that feeling. You'll stop saying no to opportunities because of a voice that isn't even yours. You'll stop shrinking to fit into spaces that were never meant for your expansion. And instead, slowly, gently, consistently, you'll start to ask a different question. Not, am I good enough? But what wants to be expressed through me today? Not, will they accept me? But am I honoring what's true for me? Not, how do I fix this broken thing I am? But, what if I was never broken to begin with? That question, that last one, changes everything. Because you can't build a life of purpose and peace on a foundation of self-rejection. You can't. You can achieve, you can perform, you can impress, but you'll always feel like you're one mistake away from being exposed. Whereas when you start from enoughness, when you start from the recognition that you are, at your core, whole, then everything you do becomes offering asterisk, not a plea. And here's what's beautiful about that shift: when your actions become offerings instead of pleas, you stop being so precious about outcomes. Think about it. When you're creating from lack, every piece of work carries this desperate weight. Every project becomes a referendum on your worth. You can't afford for it to fail, because if it fails, asterisk you fail. So you either don't start at all, or you suffocate the work with your anxiety. But when you create from enoughness, you can be bold, you can experiment, you can put something out into the world and say, here, I made this, and if it doesn't land, you don't crumble. Because your worth wasn't riding on it. I've watched this play out in my own creative work. The pieces I've made from a place of fear, the ones where I was trying to prove something, trying to get validation, those pieces always felt tight, controlled. And ironically, they rarely connected with people the way I hoped they would. But the work I've made from overflow, from joy, from a simple desire to share something I found beautiful or true, asterisk, that's the work that resonates. That's the work that finds its people. And it's not because that work is technically better. It's because people can feel the energy behind it. They can sense whether you're reaching toward them with open hands or grasping fingers. This applies to everything. Your relationships, your conversations, the way you show up in a room. When you're coming from lack, people feel it. There's a subtle tension, a taking quality to your presence. You're there to get something: attention, approval, energy. But when you come from fullness, your presence is a gift. You're not there to take. You're there to enjoy, to connect, to share what's alive in you. And paradoxically, asterisk, that's times when people are drawn to you, not because you're trying to attract them, but because you've stopped needing them to fill what's missing.